But if you push that too far, if you start saying obviously ridiculous things about like aspects of daily life that people can disconfirm with their eyeballs, then eventually they will stop trusting you, you know? And this has some negative consequences too, in that like the expert consensus is still right about a lot of things, but I don't really blame regular people for becoming a bit conspiratorial, right? Because once you know that you can't trust these people anymore, you can't outsource your epistemology to them, right? Then how is somebody who isn't highly educated, right, who isn't very statistically and scientifically literate, supposed to distinguish the cases where they can and can't trust these people, right? All they know is that, like, I'm 100% sure you've lied to me some of the time. So, like, I'm just going to disregard everything you say and look for, look for my knowledge elsewhere. But yeah, it's funny. I saw a clip recently. I think Elon shared it out that really highlighted to me how much in a bubble a lot of progressives were, right? I think it was a British Indian sort of progressive woman interviewing the Dalai Lama, right? And she just automatically assumed that he would share all her opinions because they kind of assumed that like the whole world agrees with them except for like this sort of remnant holdout of white rednecks or something. But the
Yeah.
truth is that like it is a very idiosyncratically Western phenomenon, right? It doesn't exist anywhere else, right? Like China is not woke, right? Like
Mm.
Africa is not woke. Russia's not woke. Nobody's woke. The Middle East isn't woke. This is a very unique and kind of ironically very like patronizing and colonial ideology. And yeah, she just kept pushing him to say that like mass immigration to Europe is necessarily good and is a human right. And he was just like, I don't know, that seems goofy to me. He's like, small number, okay, but like the tiny island of England become 90% Indian impossible, right? And she was just baffled, right? Because she grew up surrounded only by people that agree with her, right? Other people in academia, other people in the chattering classes, right? Talkers, basically. And yeah, it's really interesting to see that bubble burst for people when it's like, no, actually, you're part of a very small little club, and almost everyone outside that club thinks you're nuts.
Yeah. Going back to something you said a second ago, I feel like there's just such a crisis of confidence in America's institutions, and it's got some nefarious effects. So if I've just been paying attention to New York Times and MSNBC the past few years, I've gone through Russiagate, the 1619 Project, the mostly peaceful protests, and I'm like,
Very fine people, yeah.
very fine people. Yeah, there's so many of these things, and it's like, why wouldn't I get on some conspiracy theory website? It's like, if you guys are lying to me and somebody else is calling out those lies, then surely these are the truth tellers. And
Yeah.
it seems hard to find any kind of coherent foundation because most people do not know how to unpack statistics and read a study. Even if you do know how to read a study, so many of these studies are guilty of p hacking or things that you would have to really, really dig into it to find out, oh, that's not legitimate. It's such a tough thing to trust the information. So how do you make sense of any of that?
Yeah, I mean, so it really does come with downsides, right? The fact is that like the institutions are sufficiently rotten that they need to lose trust, right? But in this sort of interregnum period, there's a lot of chaos, right? There's a lot of people who believe damaging things about, health and medicine, right? There's a lot of people, just all the way up to like flat earth, lizard alien style beliefs, right? Those like so yeah, I mean like there is some increased chaos that results from, this sort of fracturing of the public consensus, even though I think that's necessary. And I think the job and I see this happening, and I see it happening in really interesting sort of decentralized ways. But the job for the right wing at this point, and it's a lot more plausible that we can actually do this now with the sort of the shift in tech is to provide a counter elite, right? And I don't think that it's going to operate in the same way that the previous elite did, right? I don't think that we're just going to swap out the population of all the universities and then carry on with the exact same playbook of like we're the experts and you have to listen to what we have to say, right? I see, like some of my favorite accounts on X are like data science accounts, right? These are people who are professional statisticians, right? They know a lot more than I do, and they post like often extremely detailed analyses on like a wide range of issues, right? And you don't really have to trust them because they use public data sources, right? Like, if you can't evaluate these things at all, you kind of have to a little bit. But you also know that they're saying these things in public, right? They're not saying these things, but shut up in the ivory tower of the academy and only ever critiqued by other people who are extremely similar to them ideologically, right? They're saying these things in public, and you know that if there are substantive criticisms to be made, people can make them, right? It's right there. Anyone's welcome to argue back, right? And if you do it well, you can get a lot of attention. So I think that the future of the information environment is a shift from an institutional model to a sort of market-based slash like evolutionary model, right? And this isn't going to be perfect, but the institutions obviously weren't perfect either. Nothing's ever perfect, right? There's no way to ensure that no segment of the population ever has false beliefs about anything, right? We can't get there. We shouldn't want to get there because the machinery that you would build to do that would be nightmarish and totalitarian. So, yeah, I do think that like this future will be messier. It'll be higher variance, right? There will be more people with, extremely, informed, accurate beliefs that are, would have been outside the previous consensus. And there are going to be more crazy conspiracy theorists, right? But ultimately, I think that the net effect of, sort of informational freedom, discursive freedom will be positive. And the reason why I think it'll be positive is because I believe that the capacity to sort of sift through this jungle, right, of information, the ability to discern, truth from falsehood, trustworthy analysts from sort of ideologically captured ones, correlates positively to some degree with the ability to accumulate wealth and power. So although there will be a very high variance in the quality of people's worldviews, I think that the people who really have their hands on the levers of power are going to be better informed than they were under the institutional model. And really that's what matters most in the long run.
Very interesting. I like how you talked about, the importance of open public data. So I'm thinking of like the Tavistock Clinic in the UK refused to release their data for the Cass report. Universities in America refuse to release their admission data because they're afraid to hurt affirmative action. How do you see that fight for the raw data itself going forward?
I think we're going to see a revolution in the social and behavioral sciences under the Trump administration. I really do. I think this because, so like, for example, I believe it's current either NSF or NIH policy to withhold these genetic data sets from anybody whose research they fear will reach, heterodox conclusions, right? So they're literally saying like, you can't look at this because it might lead you to believe things that we don't like, right? And I imagine there are a lot of issues like that I haven't heard of. But the fact is that like accounts like Crimea on X, right? Members of the incoming administration read that account, right? A lot of them follow it. A mutual of mine, Razib Khan, right? Another anthropological geneticist. He was the first citation in J.D. Vance's book. So like, I've even had, I won't say who, but I've had some members of the incoming administration like my own posts, right? So the people who will be in the positions that have previously been withholding this data, right, keeping it private, making sure that it's only used for approved purposes and stuff, right? The people who will be taking over those jobs are very much involved in this discourse, right? They are awake to these things, they're aware of these things, and I think we're going to see a massive increase in data transparency under this administration. I think it's going to be amazing, right? Because ultimately, I think that like I just disagree with this idea that we should hide truths from people because we're worried about what they will conclude, right? I think that like having a more accurate map of the world is always better, right? I really don't think that it's ever net advantageous to try to maintain, a lie for the sake of social cohesion or something, right? So yeah, I'm extremely optimistic that we're going to see a lot more transparency with people like Jim O'Neill in charge of positions in the Health and Human Services.
That's encouraging.